friends, and welcome to Type 56, the story of China's army. I'm Jason Clower, and after a long and hazardous journey, I've arrived in southern Arizona. I've entered the lines of forces loyal to this channel's valued advisor and friend, Comrade Ianov. We had to dress in French uniform in order not to be shot by the sentries, but we're here now in his command post, and I have the honor of talking to him in depth further about his book, Pistols of the Warlords.
Thank you. It's fun to have you here.
This is a joy. One thing that jumped out at me was that blowback pistols, and in particular, the FN 1900, had an importance in China far beyond anything that I was accustomed to in America or even in Europe. And they dominate a huge page space and intellectual space in your book. Why do you think that was?
So yeah, they're almost ubiquitous. There are really the only locked breech pistols from this period that I'm covering are C96 clones. Well, real C96s and copies thereof. Everything else is simple blowback. In fact, interestingly, a lot of the C96 pseudo clones, things like this that are meant to look like a C96 and they may even be stripper clip fed, are actually blowback pistols. And I think the reason is just one of complexity. It is a lot simpler to manufacture a blowback pistol than to engineer and machine a locking system. That locking system, like once you have a locking system, you have to worry about headspace. Blowback pistols don't really care about headspace. It doesn't really matter. The only thing engineering-wise you have to deal with is make sure that there's enough mass in the slide to stay closed long enough that the brass doesn't actually rupture as you start to extract it. And that you can do just by pretty simple trial and error. So you've got the simplicity of construction, which is important for a lot of these manufacturing shops. Don't have an engineering background. They don't have a lot of precise machining capacity. They may be good, but they probably don't have the measuring tools and the capability of making very close tolerance parts that you would need for a properly functioning locking system. And then, finally, most of the pistols that they're copying are going to be European models and American models from the 1910s, maybe the 1920s. And a lot of those guns were simple blowback. You know, this is the era when European militaries were carrying .32 automatics. Like, well, they weren't carrying the Colt 1903s, but the Colt 1903 is a good example. The Ruby is a good example. The FN 1900, the FN 1910. These are all simple blowback pistols. And so if that's what you're copying, well, hey, best of both worlds. It's easy to make, and you can just duplicate what's sitting in front of you.
So that makes sense of why 32 ACPs dominated one half of the pistol market, like you pointed out. But what blew my mind was that the other half was dominated by the 7.63 Mauser.
Yeah. So when the Warlord period kicks off, there's already been the beginning of the building of a modern national imperial Chinese army. You certainly know this, although not all of our viewers may. And the imperial army goes out to the West looking for good guns to purchase and to manufacture. In this case, like manufacture under license. Like they want to set up and do it professionally and do it right. And the two guns they settle on, this being, you know, the revolutions in 1911, we're talking early 1900s here, they settle on the C96 Mauser and the FN 1900. And those have just this nascent beginning of an appearance in the national military of Imperial China, which means that that's what people are used to when the whole thing collapses and we get into the Warlord period. So the reason that those two calibers show up is because those are the two pistols that sort of got their start in the pre-Warlord era. Now, I think for a lot of the weapons manufacturers, once you get into the 20s and 30s, you've got these two calibers. That's what people started making. That's what's available. And they're both in pistols. So they're both pistol calibers. And I don't think there was much recognition of these aren't necessarily interchangeable cartridges. I mean, yes, people know you can't just like take a .32 caliber pistol and put a 7.63 Mauser round in it. But when you're making the guns, you just kind of pick one, right? And like that's an FN 1900 clone, but it's chambered for 7.63 Mauser, and this is not an uncommon thing. And it's not great. Like, it might work, might not. I haven't done much. I haven't done any shooting with a 7.63
Please don't.
Warlord pistol. Honestly, I was planning to. Like, when we did the book launch, one of the things that I had as a stretch goal that I was going to do is some actual high-speed video shooting test. And I never ended up doing it. And the reason was I needed to find a pistol that was just at the right balance of crappy enough that I'm willing to have it blow up. Because that's kind of junky, but these are really cool, interesting, pretty good condition pistols, and I don't want to blow them up. But I have to be willing to blow up one if I'm going to test fire it. So I need one that's crappy enough to do that. But it has to be good enough that it'll function. And I finally managed to get my hands on one that I thought was just right. And the chamber in it, you saw it, is so terrible that I can't even fully chamber a cartridge. And I was left with just like, I don't want to gratuitously blow up what is a rare and interesting gun. So I never did any test firing. But I suspect a lot of things like this, I think would be okay for at least a small number of rounds. You know, you look at like the Liberator. That thing looks terrifying to shoot, but those were factory tested for, not everyone, but batches of them were factory tested for a full box of 50 rounds of ammo, and they work. And I don't think the first round will blow the slide off of one of these, even if it does fail. I think you'll get parts deformation, and if you're dumb enough to keep shooting it, then something will snap off and the slide will fly off in your face. And I don't think they got used that much.
I say, never mind whether the pistol will survive. We want you to survive. You have people who depend on you and care about you, Ian. No amount of Kickstarter money could possibly be enough.
You'll notice I didn't actually do it. And for the record, that testing was going to be done on a ransom rest. Like, I wasn't going to hold the thing and do it. We're going to pull the trigger with a string. But
I did, in fact, see the gun in question, and I believe my first remark was, it looks like the inside of a pop can after somebody pops the top. Yeah. It was janky.
Yeah, it was very janky.
But more than that, what surprised me was I was always assured that 9mm Makarov occupied kind of the outer limits of what was possible with a handgun, that it didn't weigh 500 pounds. And yet, these guys are shooting a cartridge that I've been told is a big smokehouse on a par with a Tokarev cartridge. And somehow enough people survived doing this that they kept making them.
Well, so I'd respond to that in a couple of different ways. First off, you know more about the actual use, I think, than I do. I don't think these got fired much. I think these were largely a badge of rank, a token of authority and prestige, and it was way more important that it got carried around on your hip and displayed than actually used. Like, even if you look at formal European militaries, the officers, if the officer's out there actually shooting his pistol at the enemy, something's gone terribly wrong. Like, that's supposed to be a last-ditch self-defense weapon, which actually, that's why you see European militaries issuing a sidearm with no spare magazine, or with one magazine. Like, this isn't a combat weapon. For God's sake, it's the equivalent of a baton in the guy's hand. Secondly, these pistols were designed initially around 7.63 Mauser, which is not the same as 7.62 Tokarev. The two cartridges are dimensionally the same to a certain level of detail, and they are interchangeable. You can shoot Tokarev ammo in your broomhandle Mauser. You can shoot 7.63 Mauser ammo in your Tokarev, but the Tokarev is a higher pressure, higher velocity cartridge. And I think some of these designs that are really borderline sort of safe for a box of ammo, like there was no OSHA in the click armies of 1924. Like, life's dangerous and short and cruel. Your pistol's not the most concerning thing in your world in that time and place. But it's when you transition that to Tokarev ammunition that it really becomes sketchy. And the Tokarev ammo wasn't around when these pistols were made, assuming we're talking about pistols made in the teens, 20s, 30s. Tokarev ammo, I assume, comes into China with the Russian Tokarev pistol,
I think so.
which is 1930s. You know, it's going to be probably the mid to late 30s by the time those pistols start siphoning, start trickling their way into China, if not straight up World War II. Or post-war, maybe there wasn't even any Tokarev ammo available in the Warlord era, up until 49. But I absolutely know for a fact, well, I assume for a fact, that once you get into the early communist period, the early 50s, these pistols are still around. There are lots of guys who still have them. Those dudes are going to start putting Tokarev ammo in the guns because the two look the same. Like, it's an easy mistake for us to make today. If someone hands you a baggie of ammo and says, is this 7.63 Mauser or 7.62 Tokarev? Like, good luck, unless you're a head stamp scholar. And that gets particularly spicy in one of these lightweight blowback pistols.
Now, speaking of the individual pistols, this must be a very 101 exercise for you, but I would love it if you would walk us one by one. These are pistols that are familiar from the Chinese theater of, well, the whole of the 20th century almost, and familiar to you as a field scholar of these pistols. But I would hazard a guess that for me and most people like me on this channel, there's a kind of spectrum of strangeness. These two pistols look familiar. We might be able to name this one, but then by the time we get to that end of the table, things have really turned upside down and inside out. Would you mind briefly telling us about each of these?
Sure. So I did deliberately pick these two because they're kind of the funkiest, weirdest, most distinctively Warlord domestic Chinese designs. These are a little more normal. So our first one here, that is an actual German-made Mauser C96 broom handle pistol. And I've put that one on the table because I don't own a Chinese-made broom handle. We've got a bunch of them in the book, but I don't actually have one myself. However, more than half of Mauser's actual factory production of C96 pistols went to China. China was absolutely the biggest buyer of these things. And they kept, Mauser made a ton of money in the 30s selling broom handles into China, 20s and 30s.
And can I ask you before you go on, in China, the belief is that they were such a success in China, but nowhere else, that they were a commercial flop for Mauser, and that Mauser got lucky that China sucked these things in and found a place for them. Is that true?
Kinda. To a certain extent, yes.
Right.
Yeah. So they weren't necessarily a commercial flop, but they were a commercial first. The C96 is not the first commercial pistol ever. Essentially the first commercial semi-auto pistol is the C93 Borchardt, which eventually turns into the Luger. But to say that it was the first commercial pistol doesn't mean it was popular. It was really clunky and awkward, and it was not successful. Like, there's a long story in there, but it wasn't successful. The first one that actually sold well enough for a company to keep making it was the C96 Mauser. However, it had its peak pretty quickly. So just like most emerging technologies, that's the best new thing because it's the first of its kind. It's the first semi-automatic self-loading pistol that actually works. Like, it's not the bleeding edge, oh, I love hot new technology and I'm willing to go buy myself the giant brick of a car phone to be the first guy ever to have a phone in my car. No, this is like the next generation where it works. It's kind of awkward, but you don't think about it being awkward because it's such an awesome capability. Like, it's not a revolver. And I don't have to fit it. Just bang, 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 zoop, bang, 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 bang. Like, awesome. Great. But that's so cool that now that someone's shown how to do it effectively, other people pile on and figure out how to do it a lot better. And in fact, it's really kind of the FN 1900, and this is a Chinese copy in 7.63 Mauser, but it's the FN 1900 that in many ways becomes the first blowout popular commercial pistol. Because the 1900, you've handled them earlier this morning, it is way more compact and handy, and if you're going to stick one of those in your pocket as a person buying a gun, it's a total no-brainer. And it came about, it's actually, the first version of it is 1899. It's 3 years after this.
Oh, we darn.
Yeah. So very close on the heels of the C96. So was the C96 a flop? No, but it very quickly got eclipsed by better guns. And the first thing that kept it, like, it kept getting life support. And the first bit of life support was World War One. The German army needs pistols. This thing is already tooled up at Mauser. And so it's actually the Prussians specifically buy 150,000 of them during World War One. And so like that rejuvenates the thing. We keep making them. Because between 1900 and 1915, sales are not great. Like it's the FN 1900 is blowing the C96 out of the water in terms of commercial success.
Yeah.
Then after World War One, it kind of dies off again. There's not that much interest until China starts buying these guns. And then eventually you get, it's 350,000 of them sold to China.
I've seen estimates of 700,000. Yours are definitely more sober, but you point out in the book that they're copied plentifully in China.
Yes. It wouldn't surprise me. I should have checked the numbers before we started filming, but like we know German production numbers, and we basically know how many of them went to Germany. I thought it was 350. It wouldn't surprise me if those were paired with another 350,000 Chinese-made examples. You know, a one-for-one parity of imported to domestic to produce 750,000 of this pattern in China. So had the Chinese not gotten excited about the broom handle and started buying it in huge numbers, it absolutely would have gone out of production. Because basically, once the Chinese stop buying them, once we hit World War II, it does go out of production. Like, it's over.
Right.
Once you get to World War II, no one wants a broom handle Mauser. That's, you know, it's the people in World War II going and buying World War I tanks. Like, they're so obviously old, bad, like obsolete. Well, the C96 is completely obsolete by World War II.
And then you said the 1900 came along, and in China didn't eclipse the broom handle for popularity, but it looks like it also really hit the sweet spot for a lot of people.
Yeah, I would say it didn't eclipse the C96 because the two were used for different purposes. One of the things that you'll see in the Warlord period is there's pistols and there's Mauser pistols. Yeah. And the two are treated as different things. The Mauser pistol, which is the C96 and all of the copies thereof, is sort of treated like a submachine gun in a way. There will be whole units armed with Mauser pistols. And these are typically going to be guns that have the detachable shoulder stocks. So you've got shoulder stocks. You can shoot this a lot more effectively, a lot more accurately than any other, than picking up one of these things and trying to use it in serious combat. You've got guys who are getting web gear of stripper clips. These kind of things have one magazine. Maybe if you're lucky, you bought a spare magazine when you got the gun. But you're not doing a lot of reloading. With a C96, it's stripper clip after stripper clip. That can be a legitimate combat weapon, and it was in China way more than anywhere else. So the FN 1900 becomes by far the most popular style of pistol, while the C96 is the Mauser pistol, which is an equal but separate category of thing.
And you got me looking into this, and what I found was that the 1900 seemed like the most unpigeonholable pistol in China at the time. It was being issued to field grade officers and generals. It was being issued to company level officers. It was being carried by private citizens and shishi bankers in Shanghai. And it was also being kept around for home defense and police use. And I can't think of too many other guns that have had that kind of breadth.
Honestly, it's kind of funny. One of the other guns that did is the FN 1900, like the European ones. The FN 1900, made in Belgium, is a Belgian army issued handgun. Like, it is the Belgian army sidearm. It is the most popular commercial pistol of all time when it's produced. What was it? They held a giant gala at FN when they made the 1 millionth FN 1900, and it was before World War I.
Oh.
Yeah, because they replaced it with the FN 1910 in 1910. this thing was absolutely just, it was the iPhone of pistols. You know, you want a pistol? If you got anything good, you're getting an FN 1900. That is the thing. And so it was civilian private carry, bankers, like, security sort of people. The Belgian army is issuing them. I think we lose a little bit of sight today of what the options were. 1900 to 1905. Like, there are guns out there. I'm sure a lot of people can name a whole bunch of pistols developed during that period, but not a lot of them were really good or really popular. And the 1900 just blew it away. And that situation sort of gets set in stone in China. Because in 1911, emperor's overthrown, like, things go, like, outside connections to the world start going dark.
Right.
And what you got is what you got. And the 1900 was it was these two pistols that were there. And so that's what continued. In the West, by the time you get to the 1930s, okay, now we've got all sorts of other stuff. Like, you want a big pistol? We got 1911s. We got the FN high power is starting to become available. Lugers take over. Like, Lugers are hugely popular, but the Luger never really gets into China because at the period when the Qing dynasty is looking for guns, the Luger's still kind of early and expensive. And I think, like, there's no reason that Chinese industry couldn't have made Lugers. They made C96s, functional, locked breech. That is a complicated gun, and they had no problem making it. They could have made Lugers. The Luger never had that cultural impact and familiarity because it just wasn't quite at the right place at the right time.
So then we get to the other side of the table, and to follow your metaphor of connections to the outside going dark once the Warlord Wars start happening, it's like this evolution begins happening inside the hothouse of Chinese pistol making. And we get these strange animals. Tell us about these, please.
All right, so you get... I have divided up in the book the Chinese domestic designs that aren't a copy of anything specific into 6 or 7 varieties. And by looking at enough of the guns in one place together, it became feasible to say, okay, this is a stylistic group, and this is a different stylistic group. And each of these has, like, genetic connections back to different guns, largely to the C96 and the FN 1900. So I have a batch that I call Mauser style, which is guns that have sort of the rear slide genetics of a Mauser. So you'll see tangent sights. In this case, maybe we'll get a close-up of this, but in this case, we have sort of an homage to a tangent sight. Like, there's a notch there, and they've got a cutout for what would be a C96 slot, but the parts aren't there. Like, we don't know what this is, but it's like, you know, it's the eyes in the blind cavefish of pistol design. And then there's another set of Chinese designs that I refer to as FN type, where they have the back end of the gun reminiscent of the FN 1900. And the FN 1900 is a distinctive gun in this way because it's got this sort of block on the back of the slide that includes a cocking mechanism for the striker. In the FN 1900, the striker is located, the recocking mechanism is actually up on top of the slide. So they look like they have 2 barrels. The bottom one is actually the barrel. The top one houses the recoil spring and recocks the striker. And so you'll get this element. In fact, that's the bit that recocks it right there. And if I dry fire this, that will drop. There you go. So it's down when it's cocked, and it comes up.
I'll be darned.
When it's dry fired. This sort of thing houses on a real FN 1900. That's got the rear sight on it, as well as that mechanism. And you'll see this sort of rear lug replicated on a whole couple of families of domestic Chinese designs. Again, they don't know exactly what's being copied, and you'll often get it on a gun like this with a separate hammer. So it's not a striker-fired gun, but they retain this feature. And that's what you're seeing in the Chinese domestic designs is we're going to put together the elements that we know are required to make a gun mechanically work. We're going to have a barrel, magazine, firing pin, hammer, but then there's lots of other stuff. And I, the machinist making this, don't really know what's important and what's not. Like, some of this is probably just aesthetic, but some of it maybe matters. Some of the markings maybe have some sort of relevance. Like, will it work without the markings? I don't know. I'd better put them on there just in case.
And I'm starting to think that some of these markings are legitimately talismanic. That they're there as sort of like a just-in-case magic.
Man, it is a really hard subject to talk about in a fair way, I feel, to the guys making these guns, because I don't want to refer to them as just, well, obviously these people are superstitious morons. But at the same time, they're obviously putting a fair amount of work into something that does not matter. And I have a hard time distinguishing between what is a superstitious talisman and what's aesthetic. Like, there are aesthetic elements on the Western pistols as well. You'll see things, the fancy FN script on an FN 1900 grip panel has no purpose other than to look good. So was FN a bunch of morons because they're putting time into making a fancy script that does nothing? No, because they know what they're doing and it's for marketing and blah, blah, blah. But where's the balance? We know there's some elements of superstition in the Chinese culture, but it's hard for me to assess how far that goes.
And I'm willing to go farther. I have tenure. They can't really get rid of me for saying I think of a lot of it is intended as magic. In the book, you point out that many of the tangent sites are actually non-functional vestigial tangent sites.
Yeah.
But today, you also showed me a few pistols that have other features that are non-functional.
I've got a great example of an FN 1900 with an external hammer. But it's actually a mechanical copy of the FN 1900. It's in the book here. It's a striker-fire gun, but they machined a hammer onto the back of the slide. It doesn't move. It does nothing, but it looks kind of like a C96 hammer. And it's just sitting there. Like, because good pistols have hammers on them.
I'm sure it was just a keen engineering-minded decision to add more reciprocating mass to the slide.
I mean, who am I to judge? I was the one who thought it was super cool and made a very deliberate point to get that gun for myself. So, I don't know. Maybe the Warlord sergeant or general or whoever got it originally thought the same way.
And I'm the fool who didn't know enough about 1911s to laugh at the joke when Ian showed me the hammer, the non-functional hammer. In fact, I have to out myself, friends. I may look like a gun expert on YouTube, but the fact is, I put my pants on one leg at a time, just like all of you. So I thought that the barrel on the 1900 was this part on top. And
it's a natural assumption to make. It really is. No, I honestly, as an aside, this is our second collaboration now, and I really love the combination of your background in the history and mine in the firearms themselves. And I think putting that together creates something that's better than the sum of its parts.
Well, that's good, because I'm about to take a bunch of historical questions and punt them to you instead.
Uh-oh, all right. Well, let's see what I can do. What do you got?
One is, it's hard to tell from the book where and when most of these things are made. And as you read further into the book, you understand there's a very good reason that most of these are called mystery pistols. Would you mind saying a bit about that?
Yeah, it's hard to say, at least for me, because I have no freaking clue exactly where or when any of these given guns was made. What I was able to do, again, the book is written from a collection that was put together of something like 300 of these guns. And that number of them all in one place, and I honestly believe that is the largest collection of these pistols that has existed since the 60s, probably, and it's the biggest one that ever will exist. It allows me to look at them and put together typographical groups, which is what the book is designed to do. So that when you, in a much more normal scenario, find one of them or two of them somewhere, you can have some contextual idea of what it is that you're looking at compared to the overall production of the type. That sort of categorization, however, did not give me any insight into what province was this type made in. What decade was it made in? There are a few exceptions. There are some guns, mostly early ones. The Shanghai Arsenal, the Nanjing Arsenal, had a few little pistol production lines that actually dated the guns. You saw one of them, like it says, 11th year of the Republic. Okay, that's 1921 or 1922. And there are a couple guns like that we can date. There are a few C96s. This is one of the places where sort of the real gun nerdery comes in handy, where if you track the changes in Mauser's markings and design features, you can get like one side of a borderline for when a Chinese copy may have been made. It's like, okay, if they copied the DRP UAP patent marking, they didn't do that accidentally. That got copied off a German gun. The Germans introduced that in this year. Therefore, we know that this gun is no earlier than that. But that's about the extent of it, because an early pattern gun could still have been made very late.
I was blown away by a couple of catches that you made like that in the book, where out of nowhere, amid this sea of mystery pistols that can't be placed or dated within 1,000 miles or 5 decades, every now and then you would just say, we have a terminus ante quem here, because this marking is related to a change in patent documents at Mauser that happened in this year. And I can't think of scholars at Oxford who would have been able to pull something like that out of their memory.
It just means I know too much about Mauser C96. We're very fortunate that there's very good documentation of Mausers. Like C96 Mausers are one of those really oversaturated collecting markets. People really like them, and so there's a lot of documentation and a lot of understanding. Weirdly, no really good books on the C96, but we can track those sorts of changes in great detail, and it came in handy here.
And this is another of these impossible, imponderable, unanswerable historical questions where I can only ask you to speculate. But based on what you've seen, what do you think was the fate of most of these pistols after China entered the communist years?
I think most of them have been melted down for scrap. So I think these probably continued to be used into the early communist period until they could standardize their small arms. And frankly, you know more about that, like that going forward as they have the Type 51 and the Type 54 Tokarev pistols. These things are, well, militia uses, perhaps. The most important people in the military get the new guns first, and then their guns trickle down. Everything kind of just trickles its way down. And I assume for some time, these pistols retained a utility because there was nothing better for some people. Eventually, all of these get trickled all the way out of the lowest rungs of military forces. And at that point, some of them probably get kept as personal pieces until they are worn out. Most of these are really poor condition. And then eventually they get collected up. There's not a lot of personal private gun ownership in China. And I don't know the exact time frame of that legal system, but I assume as we get closer to the present day, civilian firearms possession gets more and more and more restricted. Yes. And so over time in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, these things that do surface from, grandpa had it under his bed and he died and we found it. Well, so we give it to the police and the police have it destroyed. As part of the research for the book, I talked to one of the guys who was involved with Oyster Bay. It's one of the companies that imported C96s from China. And they related a story of having access to literal train cars of guns, like an open-topped train car, and they would climb into the train car and just dig through the guns piled in this train car and toss out anything that they liked, that they wanted to keep and export to the US. and everything else stayed in the train and just went on to the smelter. And these guns are terrible. Like, they're objectively terrible. If you are a PRC or a PLA colonel in 1965, you do not want this. You want a Type 54 or anything, really. So there, in a society where there isn't a lot of personal ownership of firearms, where there isn't a lot of societal value placed on collecting the old stuff, especially the objectively poor quality stuff from the previous era that we don't approve of and we want to forget about. Like, it didn't get kept. I was able to get in contact with mostly students at a couple of Chinese universities that have small arms programs and small arms collections. Because one of the things I was really concerned about when I was doing the book is, okay, I've got this set of guns. Is there anything that is missing from this set? Like, is there something, some eighth categorization, that's common somewhere, and I just don't have them because they didn't come to the US for whatever reason. So I tried to get as many connections into China as I could, looking for that sort of outlier.
Right.
And I found nothing. What I found is there was less knowledge about these guns in China today than there was here. And there's virtually no knowledge of them here. Some of the collections, like, I would get some iffy quality pictures of, well, this is what my university has in their arms collection. And I remember in one particular case, it's like 6 or 8 Chinese domestic pistols and then 2 or 3 rubies. And the rubies are labeled as also being domestic Chinese pistols. And I'm like, no, I know rubies. I've got some rubies. I've studied rubies. That, and that are Spanish-made, French-issue rubies.
So this gets back to, I'll try to keep it to just 2 more questions. But before we talk about the rubies, you mentioned guns from an era that we don't approve of. And it just occurred to me that you're sitting directly behind a gun that I think we don't approve of. Would you mind telling people about what's on the grip?
Oh, that guy?
Yeah.
So that's a cool Easter egg. It is something that I noticed. Like, the grip screw escutcheons on that pistol are coins. And I can, there's some characters written around them. And I read zero, literally zero Chinese. Like, I read as much Chinese as the Chinese dudes who made some of these funky markings read English. Like, I can't tell if those characters are upside down or reversed or anything. So I see that, I'm like, that's kind of neat. Henry Chan at 9 Hole Reviews was my go-to translator for the material in this book. It would have been you if I'd known you at the time. But I send pictures to Henry, and I'm like, hey, can you tell me what this coin says? And he writes back, and he's like, holy cow, that's Japanese occupation currency. And I showed it to you, and you're squinting at it, and you're like, Great Empire of Japan. Like, I don't think that's factory original. I don't see a Warlord factory deliberately using Chinese occupation currency as grip screw escutcheons. But it's kind of interesting in that it gives us sort of a time frame when these grips were replaced.
And maybe when this gun left the country.
Maybe.
Come to think of it.
So one of the mechanisms for these guns to get to the U.S. was Japanese soldiers taking them as souvenirs in China in the 30s. And then Americans taking them as souvenirs from the Japanese, either occasionally actually in the Pacific Campaign, where some Chinese guy or some Japanese soldier takes a Chinese pistol, he then gets redeployed to one of the Pacific Islands, and like that's his personal pistol that he just carries in his rucksack. Lots of soldiers do this.
Poor fella.
Right, and then that dude loses it to an American soldier, and I think probably more of them from American soldiers on occupation duty in Japan, finding them there and bringing them home as souvenirs. I actually have one myself that I got with bring-back paperwork from the Burma India Theater. We didn't have a lot of guys over there, but we did have personnel in Burma and India, and some of those pistols leaked into there at some point by 1944, because that's when that guy brought that one back.
And you mentioned rubies a moment ago,
Mm-hmm.
and that made me think about guns that might have stood out to you by their absence from these collections. Were there guns that you expected to find that didn't show up?
Yes. And actually, probably the biggest example is Tokarev's. I had assumed going in, and in fact, to be honest, the thing I was trying to find in China were domestic Chinese copies of the Tokarev. Because I thought they would happen. I was expecting them. It seems natural. Like 1930s, communists in Russia, communists in China. How, we've got how many decades going here before there's this political split? Why were there no Tokarevs coming into China and then being copied? And I don't have a good answer. I just know that I couldn't find any.
There were parts of your book that included specimens of pistols that were present in China then, but didn't go big. I was surprised to find more revolvers than I would have expected. I looked into it later and I found that Nagant revolvers were around, but that's another one.
Yeah. Especially because it's so much earlier. Standard, that's an 1895 pattern revolver. It was standard Russian military issue they're still making them in World War II. So this entire time, the entire Warlord era, Nagant revolvers are being made in Russia in a couple of different factories. And yet they never seem to come into China and acquire any level of popularity that led to them being copied.
As I was looking into the Nagant, I learned that many people thought pretty well of them as guns, which makes them maybe the only people I've ever heard of who like Nagant revolvers. But they pointed out, these Chinese accounts, that because the ammo is so exotic.
You know what? That's probably the best reason for the Nagant, yeah.
And they said that the Nagants would get passed down to the police, where maybe each police station would have one gun that would be kept in the station house, locked up, just in case an officer needed a firearm. But they didn't expect it to get used much, and maybe a small supply of ammo could go for a long, long time.
Yeah, I could see a Nagant filling that role, for sure. Yeah. Frankly, I could see these guns filling that role. Like, does it matter if it's only going to run for 20 rounds if you've only got 10 rounds of ammunition in the whole police station?
Well, I don't think anybody has done as much for the profile of Chinese pistol making as you have.
I think that's a compliment.
It's a huge compliment. You single-handedly raised the profile and probably the value of a lot of collections with this outstanding book.
It was the right place at the right time. So I've known about these pistols for many years before I did the book, and I thought they were really interesting. And I was lucky, I think, that the one guy who spent 35 years collecting these guns sold his collection to a friend that I knew who gave me access to them. Because it was only being... And since then, that collection has been split up and sold. So I don't think it's ever coming back together. I was in the right place at the right time to document all of it and turn it into a book.
One final question that only you can really answer. If somebody wants a Chinese Warlord pistol, either an actual Chinese manufacturer or maybe a pistol that was manufactured abroad that had cachet in China at the time, what's the most accessible and affordable pistol that they could own that was still representative? No kidding.
Yes. Because of their quantity. So broom handle Mausers are expensive, but it's hard pressed. These got way more use than any of these guys. There were way more C96s, legit German C96s in China than there were all of the domestic pistols put together. Because these are all small scale manufacture. Right. Because C96s are well known and there is such a collecting interest in them, they came back from China. When U.S. relations opened up with China, like these Oyster Bay guys that I conversed with, they were buying C96s out of China to bring back to the U.S. to sell because people want broom handle Mausers. And it's pretty easy to identify the ones that went to China. Some of them are literally marked in Chinese, made in Germany. But generally, The bolos like this, where the grips are completely worn smooth, the rifling is trashed, and they've clearly led a very hard life. Those are almost indisputably pistols that came back from China. And remember, 50% of Mauser's production went to China. It's not like it's rare to find a German C96 that came out of China. You take like the Red 9s and you just ignore all of those because none of those went to China. You're looking for M30, bolo, short barrel, like that's a stereotypical Chinese C96 Mauser pistol. Now, if you need something that's made in China, the next biggest group are FN 1900 copies. And we I have one here, but it's an oddball in 7.63 Mauser. Straight up copies of the FN 1900 with a few variations in grip profile, but 32 automatic, same mechanism. Those are by far the most common of the domestic Chinese made pistols. And they make up something like 50% of the whole collection that this book is based on.
Wow.
I actually have some breakdowns in the appendices of the book of style and quantity as a percentage of the whole collection to give some idea of relative scarcity of the different models. But the FN 1900s tend to have the least value because they're the least exotic looking. Like, it's this sort of thing that's the most expensive to try and get. The bigger the gun is and the weirder it is, the more people are generally willing to pay for it and the higher the prices are. So if you go to the other end of the scale, small FN 1900, no totally weird features, maybe one good Wowzer or some sort of bizarre pseudo-Belgian proof mark, that's going to be the most accessible to get.
I think that's a great answer because after first contact with the FN 1900, I love this.
I've created a monster.
I would gladly CCW this if I didn't have a wife and children.
Good Lord. I mean, if you get mugged carrying that thing, the best thing you can do is hand it to the guy and hope he tries to shoot someone with it.
But friends, we will soon be talking in a freestanding episode about the place of the broom handle Mauser in Chinese history because it was the first great assault weapon. And even though it began its career at the very tail end of the Chinese Empire, even before the Qing dynasty was overthrown, this thing was in action. But its career didn't end with the warlord years, not at all. This gun went to Korea and continued to see service there all the way until the end of the war. We'll be talking about that one in a separate episode because it's so cool, and we owe that, among many other things, to Comrade Ianov opening my eyes.
Well, I look forward to that one because the C96 had more of a service history and service life in Chinese use than anywhere else.
Where can people buy this fine book and others like it?
Well, they can get this book at headstamppublishing.com, along with all of the other books that we have through Headstamp. So I think we still have signed copies available, as well as the standard retail edition.
Friends, if you have not been to the Headstamp page recently, go back. You will find it greatly magnified.
Got a lot of cool stuff, if I'm just going to toot our own horn there.
Comrade Ian, you truly serve the people.
Thank you.
The viewers of our channel salute you, and thank you for your service to the revolution.
You are most welcome. It's been fun.